Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. I am so excited to read an incredible book. This book is the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. The 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva is an ancient text written in the 14th century BCE by Tokme Zangpo, a Buddhist monk and scholar who was born in Puljong, southwest of Sakyan Monastery in Tibet. 37 Practices seeks to make clear the day-to-day behavior of a bodhisattva. Now, what is a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva is an enlightened being on their way to attaining full Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. It serves as a practical guide for those people seeking to travel the path of enlightenment. It's short in length, but you could spend a lifetime perfecting the practices. If you follow these practices, it will change your life. And if you're looking for a guideline to your future path spiritually, this is amazing. It's all very easy to understand and simple, but all together it is transformational, and you'll keep coming back to these basic ideas and practices. The 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva by Tokme Zangpo. The practices. Practice 1. Being in possession of a more or less healthy human body is a great privilege not to be underestimated. Being equipped with such a body and having enough time to pursue spiritual enlightenment is an even greater blessing. Having such an admirable vehicle, let us waste no time. Let us work tirelessly, night and day, to free ourselves and all sentient beings from the cycle of suffering. My body is like a great ship that can cross the storm-tossed ocean of samsara. One must listen carefully to one's teachers, consider carefully what has been said, then meditate on this for a long time. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 2. When we stay for a long time in one place, we become attached to the people and things and practices that are there. In particular, we become attached to our loved ones. Our attachment is cause for both pleasure and pain, which makes for a turbulent life. Sometimes we get angry at those around us, and the anger consumes any merit that we might have accumulated through virtuous living. The darkness and fog created by closed-minded thought obscures our ability to have insight into what is right and wrong. Living in the midst of an unenlightened people will cause these problems. Therefore, we must leave the society of people and go forth to a place of peace and seclusion where one can meditate. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 3. After we have withdrawn from society and the things that excite us, our mental disturbances slowly decline, much like the ocean waves after a storm. And refraining from the aimless gratification of sensory pleasures, our attention to the accumulation of virtue will naturally increase. As time goes by and our wisdom increases, our perspective on the world becomes clear and objective. Our certainty in the rightness of the dharma grows. This can only be done in seclusion from the world. One should find a peaceful place, far from the madding crowd, in which to meditate. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 4. No living arrangement lasts forever. Even people who have lived together for decades must someday part company. The wealth that we work so hard to acquire over the course of a lifetime must also one day be left behind when we die. Even our mind is but a temporary driver in the earthly vehicle that is our body. The driver must eventually exit the vehicle. Therefore, leave behind, like unwanted baggage, all thought of worldly matters. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 5. By remaining in the company of people who misguide us, though we regard them as friends, our hatred, desires, and ignorance grows. Our preoccupation with worldly vices prevents us from meditating on the dharma. Who could think of virtue when the vice is so attractive? In such a distracted state, we forget our love and compassion for all sentient beings. Cast off your so-called friends who keep you from your dharma practice. A real friend would encourage you, not invite you for an evening of intoxication and idle gossip. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 6. The way to enlightenment is to find an enlightened teacher and commit oneself to following his or her advice. Eliminating delusion, the enlightened teacher's virtue increases, like the crescent moon becoming fuller with the passage of time. Having found such a teacher and following their advice, we can overcome our problems, dispel our delusions, and eventually achieve enlightenment. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 7. The world creates gods and goddesses out of celebrities. They come to be worshipped by many in the world, yet these deified people are still just people who are subject to the earthly cycle of suffering. In a way, they are no different from the rest of us, so they are of no real use when seeking liberation from suffering. They cannot liberate us. They live in the same prison as everyone else. Take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Bodhisattvas. These will never let you down. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 8. The Buddha said that the intolerable suffering of people and animals is a result of negative karma acquired in earlier lives. A wise person therefore avoids harming any sentient being. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 9. Worldly pleasure never lasts for long. It is like the dewdrop poised on the tips of grass. When kissed by the sun, it glistens like a jewel, but is soon gone. Our own pleasure lasts for a short time before it too disappears. Only the bliss of enlightenment endures. Therefore, we should put all our effort into attaining the pleasure that lasts rather than that which does not. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 10. When we were a baby and we grew, almost everyone receives tender, nurturing love from a parent who themselves may be suffering from all manner of affliction. It seems selfish to seek an end to our own suffering when those who have cared for us still suffer. It is right to seek first to end the suffering of the countless sentient beings in the world, including those who have cared for us. We strive therefore to generate Bodhisattva, the enlightened mind, so that we might end the suffering of all sentient beings. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 11. The root cause of suffering is selfishness. If we care only about pleasing ourselves with no thought for the welfare of others, then we will certainly be unhappy much of the time. Conversely, if we think and act with the welfare of others as our priority, then we are on the path to enlightenment and the eventual realization of Buddhahood. So let us exchange our selfish preoccupation with ourselves while people around us suffer with a selfless preoccupation with striving to end the suffering of all sentient beings. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 12. When someone steals my possessions or causes others to do so, we must react with compassion, not condemnation. To those unfortunate people who are gripped by compulsive desires and mental afflictions, we dedicate our prayers. To these unfortunate people we give our bodies, our possessions, and our merit. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 13. When someone hurts us, we must not allow thoughts of hatred or revenge to pollute our sacred inner space. Even When we are beyond reproach ourselves, we do not self-righteously condemn those who would harm us. Our greatest wish for this person is that his suffering be relieved by the spirit of compassion that we manifest. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 14. When someone slanders us with malicious words to harm our reputation in the minds of others, we do not retaliate. Even when others believe the malicious gossip and turn against us, we do not counterattack. Our greatest wish is that they will conquer the inner turmoil that has produced their malice and find peace of mind. Instead of criticizing the malicious person, we praise their good points and treat him with kindness. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 15. When someone reveals to the world our past failings, we do not get angry, even when they parade our present faults to the people whose opinions we most value. We do not get defensive. Instead, we listen intently, taking in the words. To this person we bow with respect, for he is our teacher. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 16. When someone we have loved and helped responds with ingratitude and contempt, we do not become bitter. Even when that someone rejects our kindness and treats us like we are their greatest enemy, we understand that their mind is deranged by illness or circumstance. Our greatest wish is to treat them with even more love and affection than before. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 17. When someone who is our equal expresses contempt for us, we will allow the insult to pass. Even when that person is inferior to us, we look on them as a respected teacher who is helping us to conquer our pride. Their arrogance is met with humility. We honor the person who insults us and do not see ourselves as superior. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 18. When we are reviled by the world as inferior and unworthy, we do not become depressed. Even when we are sick or injured and in pain, we willingly accept these hardships. We courageously endure not only our own suffering, but also the suffering of others that they have brought upon themselves through their own actions. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 19. When we are praised by the world and treated with deference and respect, we remain humble. Even when we have great wealth and the world calls us by high status titles, we remember that all of this is the illusory fruit of samsara and is not ultimately real. We cast out what pride we might have in these glories. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 20. Our inner demons are our most formidable enemy, greater than any external enemy. Struggling with our inner enemies makes them stronger and greater in number. This is not the way to defeat them. Until and unless we learn to master our inner enemies, they will continue to thrive and they will open the way for negative forces outside of ourselves to invade us. These enemies can only be mastered through mercy and love. Therefore, we work to cultivate these. When negativity arises in our mind stream, we are mindful of its rising and immediately neutralize it with love. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 21. Indulging in sensory gratification is like drinking seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we get. The physical world abounds with opportunities and temptation to not only indulge but overindulge in sensory pleasures. Therefore, when the urge arises, we are mindful of its rising and abandon the desire immediately. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 22. Physical reality is an illusion. Anything that apparently exists in this world, including our minds, is ultimately unreal. In absolute terms, the known and the knower do not exist. They exist only in relative terms. The known and the knower are no more or less real than the dream we had last night. So we let go of the cherished notion that the known and the knower are real. We recognize that ultimate reality is formless and beyond this world of appearance. We maintain this awareness every moment of our lives. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 23. When we encounter beauty in the world in any of the thousands of ways that it can appear to us, we remind ourselves that this beautiful object or person is no more real than the rainbow that appears after a summer shower. Both the object and the rainbow look beautiful, but there is nothing solid behind their appearance. Therefore, we are mindful when the compulsive desire to possess the beautiful object arises. We abandon our feelings of attraction and attachment. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 24. The adverse events that cause us suffering in life are similar to having a nightmare in which a beloved child is killed. To accept as real that which is an illusion is to needlessly subject ourselves to the exhaustion of body and mind. Therefore, when adverse events occur and we would normally be upset by them, we remind ourselves that they are not real and so spare ourselves the pain. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 25. Once we accept that we must sacrifice our lives in order to achieve enlightenment, any other sacrifice seems inconsequential. Our precious human life is the most valuable possession we have. If we are prepared to forego this, the property we own in the physical world seems expendable. Therefore, we practice generous giving with no thought of karmic reward. Worldly possessions, even one's life, should be freely given for the benefit of all. This is the way of Bodhisattva. Practice 26. If we are to reach our goal of easing the suffering of all sentient beings, we must have control over our conduct. It would be laughable for a person to say they want to ease the sufferings of others if they lack the discipline to control their own behavior. The basis of this self-discipline is to renounce our attachment to pleasure. It is this attachment which keeps us bound to the wheel of samsara. Then upon this foundation of renunciation of pleasure, we build the carefully considered framework of moral behavior that we have committed ourselves to following. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 27. Travelers on the path to enlightenment welcome adversity. It is an opportunity to cultivate patient endurance. Virtue and merit can be cultivated through calmly meeting difficulties and mindfully avoiding anger and resentment. Instead, encounters with those who would anger or harm us should be seen as something of great value. They help us to cultivate patience in adversity. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 28. Travelers on the path to enlightenment, whether they travel alone or in groups of disciples, need great discipline to just keep themselves on the path. If it takes so much discipline to keep oneself on the path, how much more effort is needed to help all sentient beings onto and along the path? The achievement of enlightenment requires enormous effort and perseverance. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 29. A tranquil mind, shamatha, is the necessary foundation upon which insight, vipassana, can be used to root out and destroy our mental afflictions. Once we have achieved this control, we work in a disciplined way to progress through the 4 dhyanas. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. The 4 dhyanas, the first dhyana level is characterized by conception, discernment, joy, physical well-being, and samadhi. The second level is characterized by pristine clarity and alertness, in which conceptual thinking is relinquished, bliss, physical well-being, and samadhi is experienced. The third dhyana is characterized by perfect composure, where the concept of joy is abandoned. One is mindful of the true nature of phenomena. Physical well-being and samadhi is experienced. And the fourth dhyana is liberation, enlightenment, a state of most profound meditative awareness. One's sensual awareness becomes neutral even to the point of abandoning the sense of physical well-being. One is fully mindful and perfectly composed. Samadhi is continuously experienced. Practice 30. The 5 virtues of perfection, charity, patience, ethics, devotion, and effort, will not by themselves suffice. The perfection of wisdom, prajna, is also required. Without this, practicing the 5 virtues will not be enough to bring us to enlightenment. By cultivating wisdom and discernment, bodhisattva, we come to understand that the actor, the act, and the acted upon are not as real as they appear to be. Their apparent substance is an illusion. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 31. We must mindfully analyze our daily conduct for evidence of delusions and mental afflictions which can be so subtle as to escape notice. We do this in addition to our daily dharma practice because without this scrutiny, we might still go astray. Therefore, we become ruthless seekers after the truth about ourselves. Let no quirk or bad habit escape notice. Be not attached to any of them, for they are impediments to spiritual growth. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 32. We must avoid criticizing by discussing their supposed faults. To do so is to act on the delusion that we are superior. If those we criticize are later found to be bodhisattvas, we do not harm them. We only succeed in harming ourselves. Therefore, we avoid making disparaging remarks about any who have embarked on the path to enlightenment, whoever they may be. If we speak of faults, it is only our own faults that we speak of. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 33. If we engage in the day-to-day struggle to acquire wealth, possessions, status, sexual partners, etc., all the things that we feel are due to us, we shall surely acquire delusion and affliction along the way. Such a life makes it impossible to contemplate the dharma and meditate well. Our mind is too turbulent with angst and attachment. Are we not surrounded on all sides by this life? Therefore, we must remove ourselves from the environments that encourage or compel the struggle for wealth and status. Practice 34. Harsh words said in anger have a very unsettling effect on the minds of those that hear. Those same words also have a corrosive effect on the mind of the person who says them. Such an effect makes our dharma practice difficult to pursue. Therefore, knowing that harsh speech harms everyone concerned, we abandon forever this habit. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 35. The unrevolved mind is accustomed to acting out of base desire. Such behavior becomes habitual. The longer we have the habit, the more established it becomes and difficult it is to change. Great effort is required of us to change our bad habits. Mindfulness is our best weapon in this struggle. Being mindful at all times, we notice and dismiss the base impulse the moment it arises. We immediately replace it with an attitude of love and compassion. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 36. In short, we practice moment-by-moment self-awareness and comprehension of our state of mind. We do this under all circumstances. In this mindful way, we consciously choose to act and react with love and compassion to whatever happens. Thus, we overcome our base nature and work towards the welfare of all sentient beings. This is the way of the Bodhisattva. Practice 37. Any and all virtue that we gain through our dharma practice we use to generate wisdom and an enlightened mind. Our developing wisdom and enlightenment we dedicate to ending the suffering of all sentient beings. The world of appearances and all the sentient beings in it are an illusion. The ultimate truth is unspeakably blissful. We dedicate ourselves to achieving that bliss for all sentient beings. That is the way of the Bodhisattva. While this is short, many of these practices are very powerful, and If any of these practices triggered you, then ask the questions why. Obviously and clearly, some of these practices seem to contradict with other practices I have advocated for on the reality revolution, in particular, letting go of the seeking of wealth. But it doesn't contradict. Oftentimes you can find wealth when you let go of the seeking of wealth by itself. These practices are very powerful in establishing a balance on a moment-by-moment basis of how you react to situations that come up, to how you think about situations that come up. In many ways, this is a simpler way of looking at reality transurfing. Reality transurfing is all about balance, and this is about balance. It's about balance in how you respond to people stealing from you, or being angry, or in showing your own humility. All of these things are important. And the emphasis is, if you do find pleasure or happiness, it's all temporary. And something we clearly have seen now is that the world around us is an illusion. We're creating our realities from within. What we see without is an illusion. Starting on the first practice, where we talk about being in possession of a healthy body, we can obviously see that it is critical that our bodies be healthy so that we can seek out enlightenment. That's an important emphasis. With the second practice, interacting with the world and living with people inevitably leads to forming attachments, which keeps you bound to the cycle of suffering. It's not saying that you need to completely leave all people, but it's an understanding that those people create attachments in your life that take you away from enlightenment. And the third practice is finding calmness when you have these mental disturbances around you. They will distract you from your path. Your focus on virtue will increase when you are away from temptations of the flesh in all its forms. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, fancy food, all of those things. When you look at very powerful spiritual leaders, they've usually gone through some sort of desert phase. There's a loneliness to the awakening. That loneliness is usually you seeking out that little bit of time to yourself. It is not permanent, but is helpful on your path. Also, it can be disturbing to part company with people you have lived with for a long time, parents and children, because we have these detachments. It can also be threatening to think that all of the wealth and possessions that you've acquired during your life will someday belong to someone else. This practice emphasizes the temporary nature of our existence, also emphasizing the importance of helping others. So there is an emphasis at the beginning practices of separating your attachments and moving away from people and things that can distract you on your path. To be sincere in your seeking, and to let go of celebrities and teachers and people that we prop up. The practice 7 was important because a love of fame and celebrity leads to this sort of elite class of people who are held up as an example, but they're not special in any way, shape, or form in comparison to you. The practice 8 was important. It talks about the intolerable suffering of people and animals, creating negative karma that occurs when you do anything to harm them. And so, in the path of enlightenment, we all agree not to harm other sentient beings. Pretty simple to understand. The concept from practice 9 is that nothing in the physical world endures. Everything is subject to decay. Everything is in the process of transforming itself. Samsara, which is mentioned multiple times here as the cycle of suffering, is an aspect of the physical world. If you identify with earthly things, you will subject to the cycle of suffering. And the bliss of enlightenment is not of this world. One of the things I disagree with in Buddhism is that there's this cycle of suffering. The distinction here is that you can lead to suffering when you fall into these traps, but there is not a guarantee of suffering in your life. I disagree with that everything is suffering. That's one of the major mistakes that I think in Buddhism, or maybe more of a distinction needs to be made. Then we move to practice 10, where how can we be truly happy if we are content to see even one person suffer? And so we strive to end suffering for all sentient beings. That makes us happy. That's how we find this. It doesn't mean that we will not be happy until all sentient beings are happy. It means the act and intention of ending the suffering of others is what brings lasting happiness. Practice 11 emphasizes the root cause of suffering as selfishness. And as the philosopher Daniel Dennett commented, the secret of happiness is to find something more important than you are and dedicate your life to it. What would be a greater cause than to end the suffering of all sentient human beings? You could devote your entire life to this worthy cause and derive much happiness along the way. True philanthropy does not draw attention itself, but goes about its business quietly, lest it be perceived as an attempt to buy people's good opinion. Practice 12 talks about when somebody steals something, the way that you react. And this is where we get to several practices that help guide us in our reactions. It's a savage world, and anger is met with anger. When somebody steals something, it's easy to create a reaction of anger. An eye is taken for an eye, and revenge on those who would harm us is the order of the day. But for you who seek to travel the path of enlightenment, you must transcend these base reactions that are more in keeping with the behavior of savage animals. You understand that two wrongs do not make a right. Love is a greater force than hate and will transform it, thus ending the suffering of the hater. On practice 13, when someone hurts us, we do not try to hurt them. It's a progression on the previous practice that we talked about. And in both cases, you're urged to transcend the base animalistic reaction of the unevolved mind, to seek revenge against those who would harm you. And that's hard. That's hard for people to do. For instance, in practice 14, when someone slanders us with malicious words, we do not retaliate, which is very difficult. The way of the Bodhisattva is to always express love and compassion. It's easy to express love and compassion when things are easy. It's hard when people are being malicious with us. So this dedication is important and an important practice to remember. Practice 15 emphasizes if somebody reveals your failings in the past, we don't get angry. The person who takes it upon themselves to point out our faults is a great teacher. It is a matter of perspective. Most people regard negative opinions as a personal attack and react with angry defensiveness or cold indifference. Your ego feels diminished by the criticism and wants to be restored to its former state. The 16th practice is very easy to understand. When someone we have loved and helped responds with ingratitude and contempt, we do not become bitter. Do we not see this all the time? Show me some respect. You're being disrespectful. Being kind to people should not be conditional on their being kind to us. If you're going to end the suffering of the world, you must show leadership in this regard. These are hard lessons. They seem simple. Practice 17 discusses when someone who is our equal expresses contempt for us, we must allow the insult to pass. We humans are hierarchical by instinct. We form ourselves into social hierarchies. It has been this way since the very beginning. So it is that you will be acutely aware of your own place in whatever social hierarchy you live in. Disapproval from a superior, while unwelcome, is likely to be tolerated. But disapproval or criticism from your peers or from those lower down in the hierarchy is likely to be met with outrage. How dare they? So the way of the Bodhisattva is to step outside of the hierarchy. Hierarchies may have helped our distant ancestors survive in a hostile world, but they have no place for the traveler on the path to enlightenment. If you position yourself humbly at the bottom of the hierarchy, your pride will diminish. You will also be perceived as no threat to anyone, a well-intentioned, good-natured person who is hard to find. Practice 18 discusses when we are reviled by the world as inferior and unworthy, we don't become depressed. It's easy to become depressed when the world looks at you as unworthy. In this practice, you're exhorted to be humble, like water. Water is not proud. It seeks the lowest place, where it quietly nourishes all that is above it. The would-be Bodhisattva not only accepts without complaint the pain and suffering that is the inevitable byproduct of living You also accept everyone else's suffering, even though they created it themselves, through their own ignorance and vice. Understanding this from a reality creation perspective, these practices are all about how you react. When you become depressed, when the world makes you feel unworthy, you'll see more and more and more of that. Practice 19. When we are praised and treated with deference and respect, we must remain humble. As discussed in reality transurfing, you create an imbalance when you act like you're greater than everyone else. And then what happens is excess potential occurs, and there's always a correction. Praise and status can seduce you into believing you're somehow more worthy than others. I know I've felt this. Instead of seeking out the lowest place where you can act for the betterment of all, you consider that your place is high up in the social order. Praise is one way that society makes people follow its rules. Blame is the other. So whatever it might be called, it is important that you have enough objective insight to see that if you play this game, you lose your independence. Don't be worried about what other people think. Good or bad, remain humble. Practice 20 emphasizes eliminating the inner demons. The mental afflictions that drive from unevolved behavior can be neutralized by noticing when they arise and mindfully replacing them with kindness and a loving attitude generally. The unevolved behavior mentioned is how our distant ancestors behaved in a savage and uncivilized world, though we still see it all the time. Practice 21, indulging in sensory gratification, is obvious. When we do that, it's only temporary. There are thousands of ways that a person can indulge their senses. You could spend a lifetime and not experience them all. Indeed, many people make it their life's purpose to experience as many as they can before they die. To them, life is about pleasure and maximal pleasure, and perhaps that's okay. You, if you want to be enlightened, on the other hand, recognize that sensory pleasures are like junk food, a sudden flavor burst, but with no real value beyond the momentary pleasure. That's hard to grasp, but it's important, and you will find greater pleasures when you let go of the temporary ones. Practice 22, physical reality is an illusion. Anything that apparently exists in this world, including our minds, is ultimately unreal. We know this may be a simulation. We know that we may exist in multiple levels of consciousness. Relating to the previous practice, which counsels against becoming dazzled by the senses, this recommends that you go beyond the senses and recognize that your senses are telling you is an illusion in any case. Furthermore, the you that is receiving information from your senses is also an illusion. How do we know this? Because you will someday perish and disappear, but the ultimate reality behind your egoic self is untouched by death. Practice 23 is when we encounter beauty in the world. That one's hard because I appreciate beauty, and when I focus on beauty, I see more of it. But physical beauty can have an overwhelming effect on you. It can make you lose your reason and generate a blind desire to possess it. This is a reaction of an unobserved mind. The traveler on the path of enlightenment controls this urge by reminding him or herself that this beauty is as much of an illusion as anything else. You dismiss the urge in the light of mindful awareness. Practice 24, talking about the adverse events that cause us suffering in life, are similar to having a nightmare, helping us to understand when adverse events happen, how we respond and react to them. Favorable and unfavorable events in life are deceptive. What appears to be good may turn out to be bad, and vice versa. Consider the lottery winner whose life becomes a torment because of his great wealth, and the wealthy man who loses it all but finds himself in the process. Everything is working to your advantage. This is instilling that practice to you so many years ago. This is why it's powerful. Practice 25. Once we accept that we must sacrifice our lives in order to achieve enlightenment, any other sacrifices seem inconsequential. Sacrificing one's life in this context does not mean suicide. It means letting go of egoic identity, the socially defined self. It means coming to know our formless essence as the true self. Selfless giving, or giving with no strings attached, is a demonstration of having achieved the proper perspective of the Bodhisattva. Practice 26. If we're to reach our goal of easing the suffering of all sentient beings, We must have control over our conduct, which is obvious. When people make half-hearted attempts to break free from their addictions and vices and subsequently fail, they often say in their defense, "Well, I tried. I just couldn't do it." This is an admission that they lack sufficient commitment. If you're committed to the Bodhisattva way, you will make whatever sacrifices are necessary to rid yourself of your addictions and vices. Excuses are for dilettantes. There is a widespread belief in affluent societies that you should not have to endure pain. Life is about maximizing pleasure and avoiding pain. This can keep you trapped in your addictions, which is right where our consumer-driven world wants us. Practice 27 is the idea of patient endurance. Virtue and merit can be cultivated through calmly meeting difficulties and mindfully avoiding anger and resentment. The natural reaction of the unevolved mind is to hate those who would harm us and possibly plan some form of retaliation. The eye for an eye principle is still honored in many cultures. The way of the Bodhisattva is to see vexations, people, and situations as opportunities to become supremely calm and patient. After all, it is one thing to be calm when all is peaceful and quiet. Not so easy when those around are making you angry and abusive. These are all trainings on how you react. The path of enlightenment happens in the moment. And in the moment, it's all about your reactions. Practice 28. Travelers on the path, whether they travel alone or in groups, need great discipline to keep themselves on the path. That should be obvious. The would-be Bodhisattva has a mountainous task ahead of them. You are dedicated to achieving enlightenment, not just for yourself, but for all. First things first, though, before you can help others, you must help yourself. As Gandhi observed, you must become the change you want to see in the world. As you progress along the path, the compassion that leads you to ease the suffering of others will make you into a leader that those people whose lives you touch will want to follow. The 29th practice talked about the four dhyanas, and the tranquil mind is necessary for that. Practice 30 is the 5 virtues of charity, patience, ethics, devotion, and effort. Will not be alone enough to suffice. The perfection of wisdom is also required. Prajna is variously described as wisdom, understanding, and sharpness of discernment. It exists independently of the human mind that is able to intuitively experience it through meditation. Practice 31 is we must mindfully analyze our daily conduct for evidence of delusions. And this is very important. Even now, I'm often finding delusions in the way I see the truth in the world around me. And this is simply saying we must be perfect in the way we think and be aware of things that are distorting our reality around us. These distortions can pull us along to another path that is not enlightenment. The 32nd practice is we must avoid criticizing others by discussing their supposed faults. From idle chit-chat all the way up to malicious gossip, this is the ego's way of defining and strengthening itself, of making itself feel superior. It's just something to avoid. When you criticize others, you're going to get more criticism of yourself as well. Criticism of oneself, on the other hand, can help to diminish the ego. Practice 33, if we engage in day-to-day struggle to acquire wealth, possessions, and all those things that we feel are due to us, we surely acquire delusion and afflictions. You can overemphasize this one. It's okay to be on those paths, but it's important to understand the delusion of seeking out possessions and wealth and status. Those are all secondary. Don't make that your primary goal, because when you do, you'll always have delusions along the way. As difficult as it might sound, following the path to enlightenment means leaving much that you currently hold behind. But it does not mean letting go of everything. It just means that you must change the way you think about it. That's what I believe. Practice 34 is harsh words said in anger have an unsettling effect on the minds of those that hear. And those who would travel the path of the Bodhisattva refrain from all forms of gossip and vulgar speech. The 35th practice is the unevolved mind is accustomed to acting out of base desire, and they become habitual. The longer we have the habit, the more established it becomes difficult to change. On a moment-by-moment basis, you must observe the flow of consciousness in your mind. When an impulse arises, you notice it's arising. For example, if you see an attractive person, your base impulse might be to imagine being intimate with them. Instead of indulging in a fantasy that arouses your passion, you immediately dismiss the impulse. Tell yourself you do not wish to have sex with them. See the attractive person as another human being worthy of your love and respect, but not as an object of self-gratification. It also applies to someone who offends your dignity. You do not allow yourself to feel angry. A lot of these sound repetitive once you start to analyze them. The 36th practice is that we practice moment-by-moment self-awareness and comprehension. Cultivate a new dimension of consciousness, which monitors what you are thinking at all times. There's the I that thinks your regular thoughts, and there is the higher entity that observes this flow of thinking in a detached way. To use a computer metaphor, you have installed a monitoring program. There is no mere program, though. This is a higher consciousness that is essential to your spiritual growth. It is the higher self that practices true free will, being fully conscious. It is capable of exercising choice. If you operate with the unobserved mind only, you are likely to react unconsciously in instinct-driven ways to what happens to you. In the process of reality creation, in the process of enlightenment, which to me are very similar, you will find that when you move away from this instinct-driven behavior and stay in the moment, as we talk about in reality transurfing, you stay in the middle screen, then great things will happen for you in the future. Practice 37. And any and all virtue that we gain through our dharma, we use to generate wisdom and an enlightened mind. Our developing wisdom and enlightenment we dedicate to the ending of sufferings of all sentient beings. And this practice is simply saying that we dedicate ourselves to the service of others. What you do not do for yourself. You do it for all sentient beings. And the emphasis on these practices is becoming aware and learning to help other people. And in that process, you become enlightened. Yes, there may be some contradictions and things that you don't agree with, but these 37 practices, given so long ago, really go to the very core of how you react and think in this world. So those are the 37 practices and my best analysis I can give you. Perhaps some of these practices will help you, but we're constantly living in a world based on the reactions that we have. And you can see the majority of these practices are really about how we react. We avoid anger. We avoid gossip. We avoid thinking habitually. And once we move into this higher awareness in the middle screen, then the world around us will change. That's what I believe, and that's why I wanted to read this particular text. I hope it helps you out. The 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.